Simona Segoloni. Happy birthday to you. Puoi anche salutare.
Grazie, grazie. Adesso Pier Davide basta, va bene così, grazie.
So, Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz, we are very honored to have you with us today at the Pontifical Theological John Paul II Institute for the Sciences of Marriage and Family. We are very honored because you're coming from home. If I understand better, you have two home places, but now you've been traveling from the Philippines for us, and we are very grateful. It's tiring. Traveling is a beautiful experience, but it's very tiring as well. It's tiring to come to a city where people don't speak so much English, but your presence is very meaningful because we started this year of research on contextual Asian theology with Professor Felix Wilfred, who dramatically died a few weeks after his first opening conference here in Rome during the Synod. So you are coming here. We are honored to welcome you. And for so many colleagues and students, your presence here is very meaningful because we have so many Asian students. And you can see some of them today. We also have students from other continents, from Latin America, from Africa, from America. And for all of them, the theme we are working on and that you will help us to deepen is family, mobility, and migrations. So many students were so happy. Some of them told me this morning, the majority is students, doctoral students, but some are in license. And they said there is one from Zimbabwe, father there. He told me, I'm very happy to be there because it's my topic, migrations. So that's our responsibility as a higher education center on marriage and the family to tackle questions that are for today. And what we got, and I give the floor now to Professor Shaji George Kuchutara, because he helped us to be in contact with you. Professor Shaji Kuchutara told us that we were together in Bangalore in 2013. We were invited together, but we didn't have the opportunity to realize that we were together. But now we are together in Rome. And what we learned from learning you, because especially there is one article that is translated in Italian for Concilium. And for many students, some of them are here, it was very important to learn to see also the opportunities of migrations, because the tendency could be to lament. Of course, migration is a source for suffering, much harm to families. but also, and what we get from you, especially with your sensitivity to the empowerment of women, we got some messages of hope. And in this year of the Jubilee of Hope, this message we get from you with clarity on the ambivalence, but also with an approach of hope, is very meaningful for theology, and theological research. So thank you for being here. We are longing for listening to you.
So, thank you. Thank you, Professor Philip Bourdain. So, Professor Philip Bourdain, the President, Professor Pierre David Aguenci, professors, friends, guests. I'm glad to present to you Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz, the speaker of the day. She is Associate Professor at the Australian Catholic University. She's an expert on migration, social ethics, globalization, contextual theology, and so on. So actually, as Professor Bourdain already mentioned, I first contacted her for one of our conferences in India, in Bangalore. We had an international conference on Vatican II, for which Professor Bourdain also came to present the paper on Gaudium et Spes. And we were looking for an expert in social ethics, particularly to address the social issues today. And all whom I contacted suggested the name of Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz at that time. And in that way, I contacted her and she came for that conference as well. So it's very clear she is an expert, well-recognized expert on these topics, especially migration, social ethics. And she's also coordinator of the group on globalization of the Catholic Theological Society of America. In fact, before moving to Australia, she taught in the United States for many years. She is a prolific writer. She is author of an intercultural theology of migration, Pilgrims in the Wilderness from Brill in 2010, and towards theology of migration, social justice and religious experience from Palgrave. And fortunately, I have also one book to show you. I got it from Sumesh, Christianity Across Borders, Theology and Contemporary Issues in Global Migration by Gemma Tulud Cruz from Routledge. And she's also author of about 50 or more than 50 essays on various topics such as migration, mission, women, and gender issues, interculturality, interreligious dialogue, Catholic social teaching, Asian theology, and liberation theologies. Asia, the most populated continent, is also the continent which is experiencing most profoundly the reality of migration. Because in some countries in Asia, from every family, there would be a person who has migrated to another town in the same country, another city, or to another country. Migration has its own benefits, but also a lot of challenges and problems. People migrate searching for a better life, but as we know, it is not an easy process, but accompanied by a lot of disappointments and sufferings. Migration has become once again a serious issue with the political changes in some countries, you know which country I mean, and the measures taken against illegal migrants, including inhuman treatment. For example, how these migrants are taken back to their home countries in chains and for hours and hours of flight without even the possibility of eating something with the free hands or even to go to the toilets. They have to go and move in chains. Those who were brought back, narrated their experience. So migration has become a heated topic or a hot topic again. Today, Professor Gemma Cruz will focus particularly on the challenges faced by families due to migration, especially the families in Asia. Migration and mobility, or immigration and mobility, challenges and perspectives for the families in Asia. So she will speak for about 50 minutes, and that will be followed by about, yeah, you can take surely. And that will be followed by discussion. So over to Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz.
Thank you, Shaji. Actually, it's longer. I was told 1 hour lecture.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's
so
fine. That's
anyway,
fine.
all
That's
right. So good morning, everyone. My presentation is structured into 4 parts. What you have is actually a draft, but you can have a look at it. It has basically the rough parts of what I'm going to present to you. So I begin with an introduction offering a description of the different phases of Asian families touched by migration, followed by a discussion on the challenges and prospects arising from such context. I then offer reflections on the implications of such challenges and prospects to Catholic theology and practice, focusing on 3 key areas. 1, mission and ministry of the Church. 2, the family. And 3rd, parenthood and roles in the family. And then end with a brief conclusion. So, the introduction. The 2024 World Migration Report from the UN's Migration Agency, International Organization for Migration, hereafter IOM, puts the estimate of international migrants worldwide at 281 million. Of the 281 million, 15% are below 20 years old, 73% are of working age, while 12% are 65 years and older. The report shows Asia just a million shy at 86 million of the number 1 host destination, that is Europe, which has 87 million. More than 40% actually of all international migrants were born in Asia, with nearly 20% primarily originating from 6 Asian countries: India, the largest country of origin, China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Philippines, and Afghanistan. The majority of these Asian migrants are actually workers, primarily in temporary low to medium-skilled contractual jobs. Despite Asia's rising economic power, poverty and inequity in economic opportunities still plague large parts of the continent's population. This economic disparity, combined with long-running political and ethnic conflicts in some sending countries like Myanmar, and increasingly restrictive migration policies in destination countries like the US, have created various configurations of the family in the low-income Asian countries such as the Philippines and Vietnam. In the context of migration that may be clustered around certain categories. Let me first mention those that are unique to the Asian context. The first are those that may be clustered around family members who move. The most common under this category relates to parents. First, the family with one physically absent parent, also known as solo parent families. A survey of households in Thailand found that 2.3% of Thai children had at least one parent living abroad, and that Thai children who remain behind are more likely to be young. In some cases, both parents are overseas, creating those referred to in migration literature as seasonal orphans or diaspora orphans, who are often left in the care of grandparents. For example, an IOM study found that 75% of Cambodian children who remain behind have their grandparents as their primary caregiver, and that 40% of caregivers are over the age of 60, and 95% are female. This family setup often occurs in the household of temporary migrant workers, but it also happens among immigrants or permanent migrants whose visa conditions restrict them from being able to bring all or some of their children or immediate family members for a certain period of time. Some destination countries have policies that prohibit certain children from joining or being reunited with their parents, such as those who are married, like the US, or of university age, or children with disabilities. Others may choose not to bring some or all of their immediate family members due to, among others, economic reasons. Another parent-related configuration of the family that is not unique to Asians is the blended family. Blended families are also known in migration literature as step families, reconstituted families, or complex families. In Asian migration, blended families typically arise from cross-border marriage or international marriage, primarily between men from Western countries or high-income Asian countries such as Japan, China, South Korea, or Singapore, with women from low-income Asian countries such as the Philippines and Vietnam. In Korea, for example, more than one-third of cross-border marriages are remarriages for at least one spouse, usually the husband, who often has adolescent children of his own prior to the marriage. Another means in which blended families occur is when migrants engage in extramarital affair and have a child or children from the affair. Among Chinese migrant workers in Singapore, for example, they arise from those who are called temporary couples. A second category, which has few iterations, relate to children. One iteration is the family with physically absent unmarried adult children of working age. This is particularly true in South and Southeast Asia, where a strong culture of labor migration entices one or more adult child of working age to work overseas, sometimes simultaneously with a parent. A second iteration is the family with physically absent minor children because they migrated, authorized or unauthorized, as unaccompanied minors. For example, Afghanistan and Syria were the top two source countries of the 96,500 unaccompanied children who applied for asylum in Europe in 2015. These unaccompanied Afghans and Syrians were mostly teenage boys under 14 years of age who traveled alone without the protection of adult family members or guardians. Thailand is currently home to a large population of child refugees and asylum seekers who have fled conflict or persecution, a number of whom are unaccompanied minors primarily from Myanmar, with smaller populations from Vietnam, Cambodia, Pakistan, Somalia, and Palestine. I met some of these young, mostly Myanmarese refugees at a Catholic-run center on the Thai border with Myanmar when my husband and I visited our friend who was running the center at that time. Among the millions of Asian migrant workers in low to medium skilled jobs in the Middle East and other destination countries, which only allow citizens, and in some cases, only children of authorized desirable aliens, to study in local universities, parents are forced to send their children back to the country of origin, even if the child was born or they grew up in the host country, either because their children are not allowed to study in local universities and or because they simply cannot afford university costs. A third category relates to immigration status. This configuration has two common forms. The first involves entire families that are stateless. In the case of asylum seekers or unauthorized migrants, in the case of those who are not seeking asylum but move as a family without visa. The second form is the mixed status families, or families with members who are authorized. I don't use the word undocumented or illegal because in theology, among migration theologians, that's not really being used. So I use authorized, unauthorized, or regular or irregular. Yeah. Members who are authorized and others who are unauthorized. In the US alone, there are around 1.3 million unauthorized Asian migrants. In 2024, a record 15,500 Chinese from mainland China crossed without authorization into the US across various South American countries by trekking through the Darien Gap, the treacherous jungle between Panama and Colombia. A good number of these Chinese, as is the case with other unauthorized Asian migrants in the US, already had family members and relatives in the US who are citizens or permanent residents. So when they join these families, they create mixed status families. You have authorized and unauthorized. Last but not least is the family beyond the nuclear and extended family. This family could either be on account of one or a mixture of various identity markers based on religion, occupation, race, ethnicity, among others. For Filipinos in Hong Kong, for instance, the Catholic Church community becomes a surrogate family, while for those who regularly go to the Diocesan Pastoral Center for Filipinos, this family could be the Monday group or Wednesday group. The days are based on day off for the domestic workers. So this group becomes their family. Kek Soon, a Cambodian who used to work as a domestic worker in Kuala Lumpur, affirms this view of her church community in Malaysia as family. You can see the quote there. Sometimes Catholic groups such as charismatic groups or centers that provide ministry among migrants, and in rare but contested cases for caregivers and domestic workers, the employer's family become family too. When family is touched by international migration, it immediately becomes a geographically split household and becomes a transnational family. There are a couple of transnational family configurations that may be somehow unique or peculiar, or at least dominant in the Asian context. The first is the astronaut family, which refers to a group of East Asian middle-class families, such as those from Hong Kong, who migrated to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand during the 1980s and 1990s. In this type of transnational family, the husband or the father returned to the source country to pursue his career or business, while the wife and children remain in the destination country. This type of transnational family is somewhat unique in that it is only the husband who is left behind, but travels for brief family visits whenever his business schedule affords him the opportunity, hence the term astronaut. In South Korea, the importance of English as linguistic capital, combined with the importance accorded to education, has resulted in the phenomenon of sending young children to English-speaking countries, in the hope that early exposure to an English-speaking environment will give them native speaker-like fluency and give the children the best chance of getting ahead later on in South Korea's brutally competitive education system. At its peak, the phenomenon saw an estimated 20,000 families, especially the mother and school-aged children, leave South Korea each year to go and live in an English-speaking country. It led to the creation of wild geese fathers, or the more common term wild geese families, a term given by the Korean media to refer to the lengths the parents will go for the educational well-being of their children. Today, education-related migration to Western countries is common among Asian elites and increasingly among Asia's rapidly expanding middle class, such that in Australia, there is a trend among Asian families, especially from China, of sending young children for pre-university education to get a foothold for placement in Australian universities. The common practice of being accompanied by the mother has given rise to the term pedomama. You can see it there. Literally, mothers accompanying their children who are studying, more commonly known in Asian migration literature as study mothers. One of our neighbors in Australia now, for instance, is a Chinese woman with a son in middle school. Before her was another Chinese woman with 3 young children who was not able to cope with the challenges of the situation, so she went back to China with her kids after a year. This brings me to the second part of this lecture that is divided into 2 sections. The first section, challenges. In what follows, I sketch in broad strokes the challenges followed by prospects that Asian families touched by international migration face. I have clustered these challenges into 4. The first, emotional, mental, and psychological. The most serious of these emotional, mental, and psychological challenges would be trauma. In the case of asylum seekers and refugees, this could be lingering trauma, sometimes manifesting as PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, from the wars and experiences of violence they fled from. Added to these, and shared by those who go on unauthorized journeys via the sea, the jungles and deserts organized by unscrupulous human smugglers, is the trauma from dangerous journeys. For those who make it, there is the emotional and psychological toll of discrimination and racism. Shared by all Asian families touched by migration is the emotional and psychological impact of physical separation. The separation is the most difficult hurdle to overcome for temporary migrant workers and their children, especially when the children are young and the migrant parents work overseas for years, some even decades, with only short intermittent vacations. As Kristen Goodorf writes in Temporary Migrants, Their Bodies and Families, and I quote her here, all their children have missed their absent parent and either make extensive demands on them or else have established new routines that do not involve the absent parent, which can be extremely painful to the returning worker. Younger children may not even remember the returning parent, which in itself is hurtful and demands efforts at reestablishing a relationship of trust, and long absences make intimate marriage and involved parenting extremely difficult. End of quote. The Episcopal Commission for the Pastoral Care of Migrant and Itinerant People of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, that's a mouthful, so I will refer to this already as ECMI. And the Scalabrini Migration Center, which I refer to here as SMC, elucidate in the case of migrant workers, and I quote them here. Coping with their workload and expectations of employers, making both ends meet with their meager salaries, all these already strain their emotions. Sometimes the news that they receive from home compound emotional heartaches and worries. Children are sick or have problems with studies. Spouse is overspending or has resorted to gambling or drinking. Spouse is seen with another woman or man. Money is sent is not enough to cover expenses. Extended family also need financial assistance. News of a close relative's death is also painful, especially for those who cannot afford to come home or who are not authorized to come home, because for those who are authorized, they cannot afford to go home because they won't be able to go back unless they want to go on that unauthorized journey again. So in the case of mother migrant workers, ECMI and SMC contend guilt brings the greatest trauma, especially for those who leave their children behind, yet paradoxically are taking care of other people's children. Fear and anxiety compound this guilt because of worries that their children would grow and drift away from them. For Filipino workers who have formed and raised their families in Saudi Arabia, sending their children to the Philippines for university education is, quote, a nightmare, according to Albert Arriesgado, a mechanical engineer forced to send back all 3 children for university education. Albert and his wife call their children every other day and chat with them online every day to cope with the separation. However, not all migrant families would be confident enough to explore the use of technology. Also, not all relationships are amenable to such verbal remedies. Not all relationships can be kept alive through words alone. The emotional, mental, and psychological struggle is more intense among the stateless, unauthorized, and mixed status families. Asian families in such precarious position live constantly with the fear and nightmare of possible arrest, detention, separation, and deportation. The second challenge, socioeconomic. A second challenge is in the socioeconomic realm. It is not uncommon for families of Asian migrants and immigrants, even in Western countries, to live in socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods, often referred to as ghettos, where poor social infrastructures such as underperforming schools and food deserts create a vicious cycle of poverty. Some choose to send their parents and their children back to the country of origin because of economic difficulties rooted in limited welfare support, considerable childcare costs, and lack of access to extended family networks. Economic hardship is more acute among migrant workers in low to medium skilled jobs who tend to work and live in dismal conditions because of their so-called 4D. 4D, difficult, dirty, disdained, and dangerous jobs. For example, migrant construction workers in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, who often come from South Asian countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, are typically crammed in dormitories in which between 12 and 20 men might share a single room. Migrants across all spectrum also suffer from self-imposed economic hardship, as they send most, if not all, of their wages to their family, leaving themselves with very little to none to their own detriment. In cases where family members do not spend remittances wisely, the economic repercussions for the entire family are serious. There are stories of migrant workers, like the household helper of an in-law in Malaysia, who worked for decades only to retire and return for good to a family that has not seen much improvement economically. Corollary to this is the increasing materialism or materialistic attitude among left-behind families that come with having a disposable income or increased spending power. In worse circumstances, the migrant is crippled economically by the financial dependence of left-behind family members, both immediate and extended. There is bolstered by false economic expectations, fueled by unfounded myths on migration as a gold mine. The migrant is practically turned into a cash cow by family members. Next challenge, political. Challenges that are political in nature are by far the most numerous and damaging to Asian migrants and their families. Discrimination based on race and ethnicity that may be compounded by various factors such as local and geopolitical events and other identity markers such as gender and class is well documented, so I will not elaborate on these. What I will focus on here are political challenges in three areas directly related to the family. One, family formation, family unification or reunification, and family maintenance. First, family formation. Among those in Western and high-income Asian countries, the adoption of prevailing thinking or practice toward marriage and children, notably marrying later or having children later or having lesser number of children, has consequences in the formation of families. Because they prefer to marry or have children when they are financially ready, it may be too late for them to biologically or physically have children, or can only have one child by the time they are ready. Another challenge to family formation can be seen in cross-border marriages, particularly the stressful and prolonged regulatory checks and processes of host countries. In countries such as US, Australia, and Taiwan, marriage migrants need to go through authenticity checks, which can be quite long, insensitive, and invasive, especially for Asian brides, the authenticity of the relationship. That it's not a sham marriage, or it's not a marriage of convenience, or it's not a paid marriage to get the card, the green card, for example. Official and unofficial restrictions, practically prohibitions on pregnancy among temporary women migrant workers in low to medium skilled jobs also pose a challenge to family formation. This pregnancy discrimination, or what the Fair Labor Association describes as triple discrimination, woman, migrant, pregnant, can occur from job application to securing a work permit and practically throughout employment, since, as in the case in Singapore, mandatory pregnancy tests every 6 months, which only applies to foreign domestic workers. And they may face compulsory and regular pregnancy tests, then termination for their jobs, even deportation if found pregnant. The lack of access to maternity health services or maternity benefits, meanwhile, impinges on family formation among female unauthorized migrants. Women who keep their child in these circumstances give birth in precarious conditions and may not register the child's birth, making the child stateless. For the second area, family unification or reunification, one example is discrimination based on occupation among migrant workers in low to medium skilled jobs. For example, Article 24 of Hong Kong's Basic Law provides that people who are ordinarily resident in the city for at least 7 years are entitled to permanent residency. Hong Kong's immigration ordinance, however, says that no matter how many years people live in the city as contract workers, such as migrant domestic workers, they could not count and they will never count as ordinarily resident during these years. The same interpretation applies to their children, as could be seen in the case of Joseph James Gutierrez, the 17-year-old son of a female foreign domestic worker who was born and raised in Hong Kong. And Joseph's application for permanent residency was unanimously rejected by the courts of final appeal on the basis of the interpretation of the law that he did not meet the criteria for being ordinarily resident. Restrictions imposed on chain migration or certain members of the family are arguably the strongest political challenge to family unification or reunification. In Qatar, an expatriate worker earning a minimum salary may obtain residence permits for his or her spouse, for male children who have not completed their university studies up to the age of 25, and for unmarried daughters according to the law regulating the entry, exit, and residence of expatriates. Note, however, that the word here is expatriates, because in much of Asia and other non-Anglo-European destination countries, expatriate or expat is a term reserved exclusively for Western white people working abroad. In certain developed destination countries, bringing a family member with disability or costly medical needs may not even be an option, as these countries see the disability as a burden to the state and society and do not grant a visa in such circumstances. Australia's health requirement for permanent residency or citizenship has had a few Asian families as casualties. These include Filipino nurse Maria Cecilia Sevilla and her son Tyrone, who were denied continuing visas. They were already in the country and was issued deportation orders after Tyrone was diagnosed with autism 6 months after they migrated to Australia in 2007. There is also Shafan Kasim, whose parents are from Pakistan, and whose case drew global attention in 2014, and Kaiban Aishat from the Maldives. In October 2024, the Australian government quietly waived the requirement for child visa applicants who were born in Australia and have lived in the country for more than half of their life. But that means that all incoming migrants will still not be able to bring their children with disabilities. Not to be forgotten are the serious effects on family maintenance by the political landmine that mixed status families have to negotiate on a daily basis. Victor Carmona asserts that the constant state of fear of being found out as unauthorized, arrested, then deported does not just affect family members individually. It also impacts the family's ability to relate with others in broader society and undermines the relationship between spouses, parents, and children and siblings. It exacerbates, Carmona says, existing gender inequalities, such as in abusive marriages where the husband may use a wife's lack of legal status to exert power over her. The reverse may also be true, of course. Children with legal status may also exert their advantage over their unauthorized parents, who do not feel at liberty to exert their authority as parents in certain situations, leading to role reversals. Language brokering among immigrant children as young as 8 or 9 years old that also occurs in authorized migration settings exemplifies this. This occurs when it is only the children who are born in or grew up in the destination country, authorized or unauthorized, who can communicate fluently in the host country's language. In such cases, even minors are forced to put up their hand up and take on much of the burden of being the spokesperson at the doctor's office, at the real estate agent, or with lawyers, all of which are complicated interactions and transactions that are way beyond their cognitive thinking and ability. Anne Chu laments, they say I should get, and I quote her here, the longer quote is it, they say as you get older, you end up looking after your parents, and the role of carer is reversed. I felt like that happened to me since I was in grade 4. It did cause a lot of stress because if I didn't know something, I didn't know who to turn to for help. End of quote. Another quote there is from a Korean American theologian, Anjo. You can read that for yourself. Role reversal also between parents and children, where the child becomes the parent, also occurs between left-behind parents and adult children migrant workers. ECME and SMC reveal, and I quote them here, with their experiences abroad and the knowledge that they have become breadwinners for their families, single men and women who support their parents and siblings become the authority, and their parents are reduced to be their subordinates. They become the decision makers, taking on the role of parents in deciding what is best for everybody, end of quote. As shown in a study of a group of Chinese migrant mothers and their children in Singapore, parent-child role reversal transpires as well due to intergenerational digital divides. Adolescent children often manifest better digital skills than their middle-aged parents, establishing themselves as digital experts on whom other family members, especially parents, rely on to access, navigate, and survive the digital world. While this and other role reversals between parents and children indicate detraditionalization of parent-child interactions and could strengthen family intimacy and cohesion in some households, they could also trigger tensions and conflicts in others. Another challenge that has political dimension is the culture of migration or migration mentality created or embraced in by migrants themselves, in their families, or migrants' families in their communities that influence, among others, even the university degrees that their children take. They take the courses that will enable them to migrate as well, to work abroad as well. This migration mentality is fed by the migration industry that is supported by state apparatus in most Asian countries and lead not only to intergenerational migration, but sometimes unnecessarily prolonged migration on the part of parents. Last but not least, religio-cultural challenge. Interracial and interreligious marriage is an issue among some parents. A key common cultural concern, however, relates to cultural transmission across generations. U.S. Asian immigrants' fears that their children will lose connections to their ethnicity amidst a more secular American culture are expressed in the U.S. Bishop's document, Encountering Christ in Harmony, a pastoral response to our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, number 48. Transcultural mediation also poses difficulties among immigrant families. This is particularly true for parents born and raised in completely different geographic and religio-cultural contexts who contend with the challenges of maintaining their religio-cultural identity and reproducing it in and through their children while raising them in a host country with entirely different culture and acceptable parenting practices. Children, like the parents, find themselves pitched between two worlds, with the parents enforcing practices which may be acceptable in the old country, but a violation of the law in the host country. For example, what may be called discipline for Asian parents is considered physical abuse in the host country. An even more complex situation arises when the parents come from different cultures and religions, especially if the other parent is not of Asian descent, and therefore raise bicultural children in multi-religious contexts. A study of Asian Indian mothers raising children with a non-Asian Indian spouse in the US, for example, showed shared experience of living with internal pressures related to cultural aspects of religion, education, and the role of family, and external pressures in raising their bicultural children, primarily coming from family and society. The second part of this part of the lecture, prospects. Prospects is used here not only to refer to future possibilities, but also current realities that are positive or promising in nature. The same, though not all categories I am using here. The first, economic. There is consensus that remittances from migrants generally bring economic benefits to families, notably left behind families in Asia. These include better housing, improved health and education outcomes, and better living conditions in general. ECMI concurs, and I quote, the improved lives of their families back home, seeing their siblings or children getting better education, enjoying a more comfortable life, and living in more humane conditions, end of quote, are good news for migrants and migration. Immigrants with higher wages, meanwhile, bestow upon left-behind families a disposable income that allows them to buy consumer goods, even travel for leisure, or contribute to economic development in small villages and towns across the developing world through family businesses that create jobs or through donations for building wells, school improvement, among others. They become social capital. Next one, political. Though increasingly under assault, especially in developed receiving countries where anti-migrant sentiment is stoked and weaponized by enterprising politicians, opportunities to bring or reunite with family members, including chain migration, remains a source of hope for Asian migrants and their families. You can see here in the statistics, the major means in which families are brought, the ones in yellow, are still through chain migration. So it remains a source of hope for Asian migrants and their families. Interventions by local and national governments in Asian countries with prevalent cross-border marriage through policies that help regulate the marriage industry and programs that help facilitate the integration of foreign spouses into society also bode well for family formation and family maintenance. Examples include Mother's Class in Japan, Family Life Education in Hong Kong, Life Adjustment Courses in Taiwan, and the Grand Plan or the Multicultural Family Support Program in South Korea. Transnationalism among migrants and their families, nation states, and NGOs or FBOs also provide manifold opportunities for families. In the case of families, what stands out these days is the use of communications technology, especially the internet and smartphones, to stay connected to loved ones. I have seen a very stark illustration of this when I was in Dubai, a city where more than 80% of the population are international migrants from over 200 nationalities, 50% of whom are Indian and Pakistani migrant workers. Everywhere my husband and I went, be it on trains, restaurants, bus, even while walking, migrants are on their phones, mostly on video calls with their loved ones. The practice of transnational parenthood, particularly transnational motherhood, is also noteworthy to mention here. Asian countries that are actively engaged in looking after their citizens overseas exemplify helpful transnationalism among nation states. The Philippine government's initiatives along this line are a good example, from brokering bilateral labor agreements with host countries such as Kuwait, facilitating the payment of blood money for Saudi Arabia to release Sarah Balabagan, a domestic worker convicted for killing her employer who raped her, and negotiating with the Indonesian government for the commutation of the death penalty sentence, then repatriation to the Philippines of Mary Jane Veloso, a would-be migrant worker who was used as a drug mule. Transnational NGOs such as Migrant Forum in Asia make a difference too. Next prospect, religiocultural. Under religiocultural, the increase in cross-border marriage as well as interracial and interreligious marriage offers some relief for Asian migrants and their families, as this lends itself to greater openness or acceptance and consequently less discrimination by the local population. Such acceptance makes family formation and family maintenance less challenging for Asian migrants in cross-border, intercultural, and interreligious marriage. In general, the Catholic Church stands out as a source of hope for all Asian migrants and their families, whether in word, through its teachings, or indeed through its multiple ministries. The Church's concern for an accompaniment of migrants worldwide has stood the test of time. Among Asian permanent migrants across the globe, the vital role that the Church plays in family integration, as well as cultural reproduction or ethnic maintenance through parishes and various institutions, is well documented, especially in Western countries. As could be seen in its history, its global character, and hierarchical as well as international structures, the Catholic Church is well positioned to engage in multi-stranded and cross-border ties and consequently minister among transnational families. Its hundreds of religious orders, which have members and missions scattered across the planet, have been doing so for centuries. They are valuable sources of comfort and salvation, literally and figuratively. There is the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences and its initiatives, papers, symposia, pastoral statements, etc. There is also Caritas Internationalis, the Columban-run Hope Workers Center in Taiwan, and the 3 Jesuit centers in receiving countries in Asia that provide casework, medical and legal help, social and learning activities, as well as accompaniment for migrants. The Rerum Novarum Center in Taiwan, the Cesare Jesuit Migrant Center in South Korea, and the Jesuit Social Center in Japan. The Scalabrinians also play a very important role through the Scalabrini Migration Center, an internationally respected migration think tank in Manila that publishes the scholarly journal Asia-Pacific Migration Review and the Exodus series, a series comprised to date of 16 booklets that serve as research guide for migrant ministry in Asia. Implications for Asian Catholic theology and practice. The preceding discussion indicates that families negotiate a diversity of challenges and prospects across borders. The reality, however, is evidently far more complex. They nevertheless sufficiently point to the multivalent nature of Asian migrants' experiences of family life and their malleability in light of on-the-ground experiences. So how might we make sense of these from Catholic perspectives? More specifically, what are their implications to Catholic theology and practice? I offer reflections in 3 areas. The first, on the mission and ministry of the Church. The Catholic Church's migrant ministry are clearly vital for Asian migrants and their families, especially among migrant workers. In fact, FABC talks about them a lot, the migrant workers, even in the documents. The prospects, and in particular, the challenges drive home the point that social justice ministries, as well as charitable services and religious and spiritual accompaniment, are a necessity, as loneliness and homesickness are inherent to the migrant condition, and the abuse and exploitation of migrant workers are not going away soon. There is nevertheless room for improvement. The ongoing formation of missionaries, says Felipe Moncada, an SVD missionary in Japan, is one of these. Scalabrini missionary Edwin Corus concurs by pointing out how overseas missionaries, and I quote him here, are not trained as pastoral workers for migrants. Their pastoral approach to migrants is heavily based on the basic theological formation they receive as seminarians or religious sisters. They are simply trained as diocesan priests or religious formation ad extra. There are religious superiors who question their missionaries when they get more involved with foreign workers because this is not the mission intention of the congregation. Foreign missionaries are at times prohibited to get involved with migrant ministry on the basis of the fact that they are sent to work for the needs of the local people, not for the foreigners. Religious missionaries in particular find this challenge difficult to overcome. End of quote. This is evident in the initial reaction by a Filipino religious missionary in Japan when sought by a Japanese member of her congregation to start a ministry among Filipino victims of human trafficking, to which the Filipino sister responded, and I quote her here, "How could I be of help since I was an educator and not a social worker? I needed to consult my provincial superior. Would I even be allowed to get involved in this type of work?" End of quote. The element of hesitation, if not trepidation, is not unfounded here for those who accompany migrants in Asia. In speaking about the growth edges of migrant ministry in a paper he presented at a seminar on Asian migration and mission that I have coordinated at CHIAM, an institution under the Pontifical Missionary Union, Corus speaks of the impact of the minority status of Catholics in Asia, with the exception, of course, of the Philippines and East Timor, and to a certain extent, South Korea. This minority position, Corus bemoans, has serious implications on the willingness and capacity of local churches to criticize government policies that impinge on migrant welfare. In some less democratic Asian countries, the space and ability to advocate for migrants, especially against policies that pose problems for migrants, is severely limited. Missionaries themselves sometimes have run-ins with state actors and authorities as a result of this, such as the French priests and Filipino migrants arrested in Saudi Arabia for having mass, and Corus' encounter with authorities himself when a migrant was arrested inside his very own church in Taiwan. Equally concerning, adds Corus, and I quote him here again, is how there are local bishops in Asia who are forced to be silent about the abuses migrants suffer from their employers, the local population, and the government. In most cases, these bishops and other local church leaders are not comfortable with speaking against the government for fear of being accused of intruding over government policies. They are afraid, as a religious minority, that the church may be negatively targeted by the host society and by the government. To avoid being criticized for lack of concern towards foreigners and at the same time avoid ruffling the feathers of state authorities and some local churches, limit their involvement to providing space for the use of migrants and doing purely sacramental activities. End of quote. So how might mission and ministry or missionary formation look in this context? I offer here reflections on three possible features. The first is networking. One component of this networking is that of Catholics reaching out and seeking the help of others in church and society at home and overseas. For instance, Corus says that the relative success of ECMI's programs, such as the Exodus program, is due to ECMI's belief in the vital role of networking with various lay professionals, lay leaders, sectors, groups, and institutions in Philippine society, including the government and in other Asian countries. The Exodus program itself is a formation program for those who want to minister among migrants. Was successfully held in South Korea. It was created by the Scalabrini Migration Center and ECMI, and it was held in South Korea and Malaysia with participants from Brunei and Singapore, and in the latter as a result of ECMI's and SMC's deliberate strategy and determination to seek the help and collaborate with Catholic leaders, clergy, religious and lay, and institution in the said countries, notably those who went to the Philippines to take the program. The other side of this coin of networking is for Catholics to be ready and available, and whenever relevant and appropriate, to offer assistance to other sectors, groups, and institutions working for migrants and their families. So you don't just only take, but you also give. The Philippine government, for instance, enlists the help of religious congregations in migration-related programs such as giving the PIDOS, or the Pre-Departure Orientation Seminar for Migrant Workers. Decades ago, when I was still less informed about the Middle East context, I was flabbergasted as I listened to a religious sister tell Saudi-bound female domestic workers not to bring religious articles of faith, including the Bible and the Rosary. You know, it was only much later that I found out why it is essential to explicitly say that. Indeed, collaboration and having allies and partners are key to networking as mission or mission strategy, especially in view of the risks and restrictions posed by the minority status of Catholics in Asia. In religiously plural sending and receiving nations, the Church can attempt alliances with other religions to lobby for migrant protection. In religiously restrictive or less democratic societies like the Middle East, the Church can build informal partnerships with embassies or consulates. When I visited the Philippine Embassy in Bahrain, as part of my visit to the ambassador, who's a friend of mine, I was pointed to a shelter for female migrant workers who are victims of abuse and violence. This is the same ambassador who was of great help during the visit of Pope Francis in Bahrain. It's a Muslim country that hosts the largest Catholic church in the Gulf. When I gave a lecture in Germany last December and mentioned my visit to this large cathedral in Bahrain, the Cathedral of Our Lady of Arabia, an academic in the audience found interesting the word Arabia in the title of Our Lady. What is equally interesting and noteworthy to mention to me is actually the fact that the land on which the cathedral stands was donated by the King of Bahrain himself. A testament, I'd say, not only to the King's generosity and recognition of the religious needs of the numerous Catholic migrants in the Gulf, but also the networking behind the scenes done by Catholic leaders, clergy, religious, and lay migrants themselves to build and make the cathedral what it is today, a beacon and haven for faith for the more than 1 million Asian Catholic migrant workers in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia alone. Finding allies and partners, both groups and individuals, in the local church and community is also important because the development and presence of a robust migrant ministry in local churches may also be hobbled by the lack of openness to, as well as appreciation of the ministry by members of the local church itself. I want to specifically mention here a group in receiving countries whose potential as allies and partners or helpers and collaborators may be underestimated, and these are the foreign wives and mothers. They are clearly in a good position to be of help in crafting and implementing ministries among migrant families, not only because they are a central figure in such a family, but also because many are actively involved in church life themselves. St. Christopher's Church in Taiwan's migrant volunteers come from 4 important parish organizations: St. Christopher's Catholic Charismatic Community, Family Life Group, Legion of Mary, and the 4th, Filipinos Married to the Taiwanese. They even have an association, FMTA. South Korea's vibrant ministry among migrants substantially relies too, not only on Filipino workers, but also Filipinas married to Koreans, especially those who joined the Exodus Formation Seminar held by ECMI and SMC in partnership with the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Korea. At St. Anselm's Church in Tokyo, those who frequent the monthly Bible course, which was offered upon the request of parishioners who have attended the Catechism for Migrants started by the parish, are Filipinos married to Japanese and temporary workers who have the time to attend it. As FABC 7, Article 5 states, we must, quote, keep in mind that the migrants themselves are to be the primary agents of change, end of quote. A second feature is the twin mission of cyber ministry or mission to the digital continent. These have various forms. Among migrants, it's not only about online masses or websites to access and perform ethnic religious traditions, but also a one-stop shop website or web page containing information on and resources for those who need help or assistance on general and specific concerns. This is vital, not only because many migrant workers experience time poverty, but also live in places where the nearest church is quite far and require travel expenses that can eat up their already meager budget. The Cathedral of Our Lady of Arabia is around the oil fields area. It's quite far from the center. So, in repressive countries like Saudi Arabia, a cyber church will be beneficial. Among migrants and especially their families, this cyber ministry could be in the form of the church making provisions for digital access and literacy. Goodorf narrates the case of the family of an Indonesian female domestic worker in Saudi Arabia who initially thought that the daughter working in Saudi Arabia was living the life of the rich, living a very comfortable life. Their thinking changed dramatically when the domestic worker discovered her employer's Wi-Fi, and she sent pictures of the closet allotted to her, the very small closet, the bruises on her arms, and the appetizing dinner she was given. Myth removed. So Goodorf says, technical help in assisting prospective migrants to identify cell phones that will work in the receiving nation, providing one or more phones and perhaps a computer in the rectory or parish hall where phoneless or computerless families could receive calls, even educating families that can afford computers on how to use Skype or other online communication services could be of tremendous help. That's cyber ministry. In abusive situations, digital access and literacy can be a lifeline for migrant workers and their families in cases of emergency. Digital literacy for grandparents and parents both at home and overseas, such as study mothers, will also help bridge the intergenerational digital divide and prevent unhealthy role reversals arising from this divide. It goes without saying that such ministry also educates all members of the family of the excesses and detrimental effects of ICTs or information and communication technologies on family life. As Marcus Mesher cautions in his article, Reading the Screens of Our Times, screens can become an obstacle to healthy family relationships between spouses, between parents and children, between siblings and other members of the family, as they create distractions, make virtual hermits out of young people, desensitizes couples to pornography, and facilitate emotional infidelity. In the case of migrant workers, actually literal infidelity, as some of them find new partners on social media. Mission to the digital continent or digital natives is also imperative to bridge generational divide along religious cultural lines. Young adults have not known a world without smartphones and social media. The traditional understanding of a local parish and its congregational form and ethos may seem quite outdated for the digital generation. Besides, programs for young adults, they say, are often missing, practically non-existent across parishes, as immigrant ministries, according to the USCCB document, still largely focus on children, preparation for First Communion and confirmation, or the old folk with their devotional practices. A third feature, perhaps more of a characteristic, is strategic pastoral initiatives. It is simply impossible to attend to all migrants and their families, much less address all of their concerns. Pastoral initiatives in this context can be effective if they are targeted, creative, and dynamic. Thinking outside the box and being innovative can make a real difference. Let me illustrate my point with a few examples. First is the case of the Diocesan Pastoral Center for Filipinos in Hong Kong. It has that name because it was originally established for Filipino domestic workers. Today, it has evolved very dramatically. It includes any migrant women domestic worker. So other Asian migrant domestic workers. And then they came up with establishing groups based on workers' day off. It's a brilliant idea because it provides better possibilities for the women to establish ties and form a family with their group. Another example is the Borrow a Book program, which I saw at a church also in Hong Kong, frequented by migrant women domestic workers. It was well thought and creative, I think, because, well, it was successful because it's brain exercise for the many educated domestic workers engaged in routine, mind-dulling work. You know? A third example is ECMI's various projects in partnership with Philippine schools to address the needs of left-behind children. And this includes what you can see there, a trainer's training program for teachers accompanying children of migrants. Formation of school clubs for children of OFW stands for Overseas Filipino Workers. Establishing the Sons and Daughters of OFW's Value Formation Program in collaboration with teachers and guidance counselors who have completed the Exodus Formation Program. And fourth, the annual search for 10 outstanding sons and daughters of OFW Student Achievers Award to help the children value the sacrifices of their parents. One interesting strategic proposal I have come across comes from Lou Aldrich, a Jesuit in Taiwan, who, as a missionary in Taiwan, based on his experience ministering to migrant workers in Taiwan's factories. Aldrich reckons that if religious orders in the past established and run schools, hospitals, and orphanages, having a religious congregation with members in both Philippines and Taiwan that is specifically dedicated to creating honest labor broker organizations could address the structural problem of corruption that fueled the exploitation. A new congregation, labor broker, any takers? I don't know. The second one on the family. A key task here is to expand the current understanding of family identity and membership. Amoris Laetitia provides some useful starting points with terms such as wider family, which includes parents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and even neighbors, AL 187197, and larger family, which includes friends and other families, as well as communities of families who support one another in their difficulties, their social commitments, and their faith. AL 196, and fathers-in-law, mothers-in-law, and all relatives of the couple. These give the impression of an understanding of the family as either the nuclear or extended family or a close-knit, like-minded circle of people who are physically present to each other or at least live in close physical proximity to one another. As illustrated, however, in migrant transnationalism and the familial bonds forged by Asian migrants virtually and with peoples and groups across a wide spectrum and across multiple borders, one could say that even the larger family described in Amoris Laetitia may not fully take into account the complex character of kinship arising from the web of multimodal, multi-locational, cross-border dispersion within the processes of migration in the context of globalization. More specifically, the strong tendency by migrant workers to see as family the church community and people who either share or alleviate their struggles highlights the need for an Asian theology of the migrant family rooted on the understanding of the church and the human family as the body of Christ. Korean-American theologian Anselm Min contends that the body of Christ is not only a category of ecclesiology, but also that of theological anthropology. Min explains this in the essay Migration and Christian Hope. Oh, that quote is there. So the quote is there. It is fitting to teach the faithful that we are, by virtue of our membership of the body of Christ, sons and daughters of the same heavenly Father. But it is also imperative to teach the corollary, that we are therefore brothers and sisters of one another in the triune God, and to draw the political conclusion that our global human solidarity in God should determine our political priorities and concrete choices. As St. John Paul II reminds us in Solicitudo Socialis number 38, we are all really responsible for all. The reality is that, as pointed out in the book Our Kids by Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam, there is a shift from a society when our kids meant all the kids in a town to one where our kids just means our biological kids. This and the continuing important role of the extended family, as well as the involvement of an even larger family in Asian migrant families, drives home the point that a community hermeneutics would be useful too. As I have pointed out elsewhere, migration in the context of globalization has expanded the proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child," into "It takes a global village to raise a child." Christians are people born into a community that is the family and brought into a community that is the church. by a God of community that is the Trinity. In practical forms, community involves relationships, connecting with others, learning from others, sharing with others, rejoicing with others, and struggling with others. Despite exposures to urbanization in an individualistic cultures, this communal or community spirit remains on the ground and virtual realities for many Asian migrants and their families, even more so in migration settings. Hence, it is but fitting for it to underpin a theology of the family in the Asian migration context. Such a perspective finds basis and encouragement in Familiaris Consortia's reference to the family's service to society. St. John Paul II says, families cannot stop short at procreation and education, FC 44. They also need to contribute to a worldwide solidarity through an inner energy that generates, spreads, and develops justice, reconciliation, fraternity, and peace, FC 48. The experience of Asian families in the context of migration also calls for a more expansive understanding of what a family is for a couple of reasons. First, transnational families drive home the point that the family is no longer or not just the biological nuclear activity, but one in which the formative relationships are those that operate on a vertical axis. Second, transnational family life in the age of migration challenges dominant discourses, which generally frame gender relations within households or families and ignore how physical separation and state policies and programs influence family politics and the political economy of emotions. Approaches that ignore the role of the state in family politics often question migrant parents. This approach runs the risk of vilifying migrant fathers, and in particular migrant mothers, and downplays the sacrifices and contributions both make to the family and society at large. Scriptures offers a good basis for articulating such a theology. In looking at the final interaction between Jesus and a family member in John 19:26-27, when Jesus told Mary, "Woman, here is your son," and to the beloved disciple, "Here is your mother," Margaret Wesley contends that at the cross, a new family comes into being. Family of birth gives way to family of creation. It is specifically at the cross that this family is created, and it is our relationship to Jesus that forms our filial, maternal, fraternal, and sisterly bonds. In a sense, what Jesus mentioned in Matthew 12:50, "Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother," to refer to the need to understand the family not just literally, but also metaphorically, is made real at the foot of the cross. It is not that Jesus divests himself of kith and kin, but rather that the kinship bonds are transformed to become symbolic of a whole new understanding of family. This understanding of the family is certainly more attuned to the experience of Asian migrants and their families insofar as, one, Jesus directly points to the notion of family as beyond biological ties. Two, kinship beyond biological connection is forged at the foot of the cross, which is symbolic of pain, suffering, and injustice. And third, love and discipleship, not necessarily biological kinship, are revealed as key to being a family and being a member of a family. Third, the next one, on parenthood and roles in the family. The preceding discussion shows that migration creates possibilities for reconfiguring roles and consequently relationship and authority in families. The most obvious one that has gotten more attention in migration literature is the movement or shift in the roles of the husband, father, and wife, mother. Nestor Medina, for instance, speaks of the reinvention and transformation of patriarchy, kind of soft patriarchy that makes men assume full responsibility for their lives and their families, but with room to conceive the possibility of seeing their spouses as equal partners. Although perhaps overstated, Medina is onto something here. Michel Gambourd points to how the traditional concepts of the value of women's work are significantly altered by the economic contribution Sri Lankan migrant domestic workers make to their households. Transnational mothering also forms new meanings of motherhood by expanding mothering to encompass breadwinning. Migration may also lead males to confront entrenched ideas of masculinity. This is, as an example, the publication by the Scalabrini Migration Center titled Gender and Migration Theological Challenges, which is part of the Exodus series, actually edited by then SMC director, now Cardinal Fabio Baguio sheds light on this and Medina's point through the description of the three types of husbands which have developed over years of migration of wives based on studies in the Philippines and Indonesia. One are the husbands who work outside the home, in addition to taking the role of child rearing and domestic chores in the family. By doing so, they are able to maintain their self-respect as providers. The second type have two subtypes. The first is the husbands, this is the general description. Husbands who fully depend on the wife's remittance because it is difficult to find gainful employment. Lacking any support system, they need to stay at home and take care of the very young children. And the two subtypes are A, the house husbands who have easily adjusted to the role of child rearing, domestic work, and manager of the wife's remittance. Even if doing household work does not match their traditional notion of masculinity, they nevertheless view this as a form of economic productivity, since it contributes both to the financial and emotional stability of the family. The subtype, the B, house husbands who find it very difficult to shift roles. Those who feel that their mere presence or just by simply being there for the children, they are already fulfilling the role as responsible fathers. They also manage well their wives' remittances, but in reality, it is the female relatives, including the eldest or older daughters, who are primarily managing the household and taking care of the children. Most husbands left behind, according to the author of this research, seems to belong to this subcategory. The third and last type are the irresponsible ones, those who squander their wives' remittances, engage in extramarital affairs, reject household work, and neglect the care of their children. Nevertheless, or precisely because of such behavior, they see and assert themselves as real men. They are eventually abandoned by their wives and children. End of quote from that research. These nuanced changes and the various role reversals between parent and children, both helpful and harmful, mentioned in the previous section, call for a reconsideration of the ethics of family care and roles in the family, notably parenthood. An impetus here is that, as Christina Trina puts it, and I quote her here, we read about the mother, the father, the child, and the family as if they were static stereotypes. Properly expressed in the plural rather than the singular, they take on various sizes and shapes in different cultures and circumstances, even in the same household over time. End of quote. Even the discourse of broken families, immigration theologian Kristen Heyer notes, in familismo across the Americas, fails to capture the flexible strategies transnational families accomplish. The experience of migrant wives, mothers who blur the traditional male role of worker, breadwinner, and left behind husbands, fathers who embrace domestic and nurturing roles, open up spaces for a more holistic look at parenthood, as well as roles and practices in the family in general. A less binary approach to parenthood that looks at men and women as parents individually and together without simply and exclusively labeling what they do as practices for mothers and fathers could also be beneficial. The binary preoccupation with gender roles has created or solidified entrenched positions that have, in my opinion, resulted to the impoverishment of the equally important and fruitful approach of focusing and having broader perspectives on parenthood. As Amoris Laetitia says, love in the family is not simply of the love of father and mother as individuals, but also of their mutual love perceived as the source of one's life on the solid foundation of the family. AL 172. Julie Hanlon Rubio, who approaches family ethics beyond sex and controversy, drives home this more constructive perspective to parenthood. She writes, I should move forward. Okay.
Yeah.
The dual vocation of parenthood belongs to everyone. Christian mothers must ask themselves if they are fulfilling the public side of their vocation, while Christian fathers ought to challenge themselves to participate more fully in the private lives of those they love most. End of quote. The essay by Korean-American theologian Hoon Choi, titled Beyond Helping Out Fathers as Caregivers, which proposes the caregiver metaphor of fatherhood, reflects Handlos Rubio's point and exemplifies the evolving and much broader roles, including traditionally female roles, that men take on these days. A more specific challenge related to parenthood is twofold. One is parenthood in the context of physical separation and cyber parenting, and two, parenthood beyond biological parents, relatives, and beyond adults, as per experience of role reversals between parents and children. Christian Higher provides a usable proposal in this regard. Higher argues that the realities that migrant families endure contest idealized family values and dominant forms of Christian family ethics. A more constructive Christian family ethic, Higher says, needs to be embedded in a profoundly relational anthropology, covenantal love, and the social mission of the family in such a way that families become, and I think it's a very good way of putting it, schools of deeper humanity. Higher proposes a political economy in which being in need of care and being responsible for the care of others are the human norm. Maria Adeneve Reyes Espiritu echoes Higher's point in her study of Philippines transnational mothers' family relations spirituality. This is a recent dissertation in Roubaix, which I was asked to examine. And I found it very interesting because Nave makes a plea in her dissertation from an I care to a we all care perspective, to refer to the need for balancing the valuing of motherly feminine care with a communal or collective responsibility for care for the family. I think in the Asian context, this is quite relevant. Reyes' Espiritu study is also instructive with its argument for a childist perspective on migration theologies as a complementing discourse to the strong emphasis on gender-bound parental duties. She suggests childish perspective given that, one, we are all God's children; two, we all have been children once; three, adults can learn from children; and four, in reflecting on how parents can be supported, it is significant to touch upon the value of taking children's participation in family life into account. Such perspective is affirmed by Singaporean academics Sherlina Wang and Brenda Yeo, based on their research on children of study mothers. Wang and Yeo reckon that child-centered migration studies not only highlight the children's role in shaping the migration journeys of their families, but also disrupt hegemonic discourses and dominant representations of children and migration as simply migrants' children and restore them to the status of migrant children. So from migrants' children to migrant children, there's a different perspective. Maruja Asis, Director of Research and Publications at Scalabrini Migration Center, makes an explicit plea for this child lens, especially in view of the experiences of migrant children, left behind children, of migrant workers, and children who are part of multicultural families in Asia. And if I may add, the child language brokers. Such child lens on Catholic theology and practice relating to migrant families is a necessity for a holistic approach, not just to parenthood, but to family and family roles in general. So to conclude, when I started working on migration more than 20 years ago, one of the dominant slogans among churches, NGOs, and FBOs, or faith-based organizations in Asia, was "No more families torn apart by migration." It was not really referring to family reunification or family unification, but to a scenario where no father, mother, or any family member would be forced to migrate for work. Today, that ship has sailed. Labor migration has unfortunately become a way of life among Asians, despite the ever-increasing challenges and the dwindling prospects for families touched by it. With these challenges and prospects come considerable tasks ahead for Catholic theology and practice. The breadth and the depth of our response and the meaningfulness as well as effectiveness of such response may all boil down to our reception of the important yet intensely unsettling changes that these challenges and prospects disclose. Migration clearly has implications for the ongoing identity development and relationship dynamics within the family. Indeed, where it is the ones who are away or the ones who are left behind, families touched by migration face old as well as new and newer challenges and opportunities that require a holistic and far more nuanced approach to the moral economy of kinship. The family in the age of migration is in flux, and as is characteristic of the processes of globalization, is experiencing profound changes to its locus of identity and to a certain extent authority. Ultimately, an Asian Catholic theology of family in the age of migration needs to take into account not only political economy in its various manifestations, but also evolving kinship systems and practices. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz for the excellent presentation. You have given a wide spectrum of the migration situation, the challenges, the situation, the political, cultural, social, economic challenges or problems involved. But at the same time, you haven't focused too much or only on the problems. You have also presented the perspectives, the possibilities, and also the pastoral context, how and ways how theology can be developed. So, and as Professor Bordain mentioned in the beginning, it is not merely the problems, but also a message of hope. You have given that. So, thank you very much. Now, the floor is open for discussion.
But what we'll do, because, more than 1 hour is for some of us is a little
Okay.
tiring.
Yeah.
So what we are going to do, because we'll have a beautiful text, thank you very much. And next month, without the presence of Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz, we can deepen what she has offered to us. And it's a tremendous gift. Thank you very much. So what I propose now is we have to take opportunity of her presence. So maybe you want to ask something, but it will be difficult. So in the synodal way, let's take 2 minutes silence, and if you want to share with your neighbor, so that we can, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
So that we can focus, no more than 3 minutes, but don't hesitate to say, okay, I've understood this, and I want, because it's my research, I have a question I want to ask Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz. And professors will have lunch with her, so we can continue and do it the professor's way, if I can say, but we'll give you the priority to students. Okay? So please, now you can speak, and in 3 minutes, we ask her. Yeah, you can move. You can move together. I'm going to get you. Sì. Ok. Tradurre?
Sono fare l'italiano, il francese.
Sì, sì, sì. Sì, 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 va bene, va bene, va bene. Può venire adesso.
So we shall begin. Shall we begin? Or okay. So perhaps we can take 3 questions at a time. But I would request you to ask the questions briefly so that there will be more time for discussion and more people can ask questions. So after 3 questions, the professor will reply. And you can also ask in Italian. Julian also is here to translate. Or if you prefer to ask in English, that is also welcome. Please introduce yourself, just giving your name
Okay,
when you raise the question. Thank you.
please raise your hands. There's 1, 2. Okay, Anne, and then Gabrielle. Please.
In your presentation, you show us very concretely statistics, a number, and to show that the power, economic power in global migration. And you also gave us one example of mixed marriage. Usually, with women from low-income country like from Vietnam and from the Philippines. So it seems to me that economic element is the first element which lead them, particularly migrants, to their decision to get married to each other. So my question is that in your study, according to your experience and your study, is there any relation between income which can change and divorce rate among these couples whose marriages are influenced a lot by economic element?
I really thank you for this deep presentation. And it came to my mind that I'm coming from Ethiopia, a Franciscan Capuchin coming from Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is also one of the biggest challenges we have is immigration. Earlier, the immigration dynamics is thought to be towards the West, more developed country. And this time I'm hearing even a tiny, small country we have never heard before this time, where people are scammed due to, I don't know what kind of technology, to promising a certain job or life change. And they're ending up in a Myanmar, for example, a process that says, okay, we give you a job or this this New York in Thailand or Philippines or other Asian countries. What was the dynamics about it? Did you hear about this dynamics in this time? Thank you.
Faccio la domanda in italiano e poi dopo Julian forse può tradurre. Sono indonesiana, è molto interessante la sua presenza. La mia congregazione è nata in una isola, si chiama Flores, e le cose che lei ha presentato è molto sentite in questa isola. Soprattutto adesso la situazione che stiamo affrontando, la mancanza della presenza dei genitori, e questo la sentiamo molto nella congregazione, perché in questi 5 anni la mia congregazione sta facendo riflessione come si può fare formazione per le ragazze che vengono per entrare nella nostra congregazione, perché stiamo pensando la formazione nel tempo passato e adesso è molto differenza a causa di questa situazione, la mancanza della presenza dei genitori. Davanti a questa situazione forse la sua esperienza può aiutarci. Grazie.
So Sister Sophia is from Indonesia, and her religious congregation came into being on an island called Flores, where many of the factors that you spoke about are very relevant. In particular, what they experience is a lack of parenthood, lack of parents. And what they're seeing is that this impacts the kind of formation that the new sisters who are joining their community require when these sisters grow up in contexts where they don't have the presence of their parents. So she's just wondering if you have any reflections in that regard.
Thank you for those questions. The first question by Anne. You asked about is the change in economic situation a factor for divorce? Did I get that right? For cross-border marriage? Yeah. Usually, it's not the bigger factor would be violence against the wife rather than the economic conditions. Because first, in terms of they're already economically dependent on the husband and the family. So as long as they are being fed, they have the basic economic needs, that is not usually a factor. They will bear with it. They will endure it. But the more common causes of the separation or the breakup of the marriage ending in divorce would be when there is abuse happening, being inflicted on the wife. So for Gabriel, that what you asked is very much an issue now in the Philippines, in Thailand, and in China, in Cambodia, across those countries. This is what they call the scam factories. You know, all those spam messages that you get, or those love scam, because they have evolved there. You heard about troll farms. These are scam farms. They just what do you call this? They just raided one in Cambodia. What happens is, like what you're saying, these are educated people. They offered a job. There was one as actually an actor in China. It became virtual because she was a kind of well-known actor in China who fell through hard times and he fell for these jobs. The thing is that, so they will recruit you. It's supposed to be a job in Singapore. So you do fly to Singapore, but that job has a training in Thailand. So they will send you to Thailand. But when you end up in Thailand, as soon as you land in the airport, they drive you through the border of Myanmar. And then the next thing you know, you're in that building with CCTV, 24-hour CCTV, and you cannot escape. About 3,000 were rescued across nationalities. And the nationality is depending on who they want to victimize. Those Mandarin-speaking Chinese, because in this case, this factory, they were mostly targeting Chinese in mainland China who speaks Mandarin. Okay? But even in the Philippines, there was one that they just raided a couple of weeks ago. They were Vietnamese victims. So it's quite transnational. So what migration has all done is also transnationalized crime. So all these transnational crime syndicates, they have gone global. So even in a country, you cannot imagine, in the Philippines, they're recruiting people from Brazil, people from Vietnam, people from China, sometimes even locals who are abducted because they need people to work in these factories. So it has become I'm not sure about Latin America, but certainly in Asia, in those countries that I have mentioned, it is proliferating. Yeah. Sophia's point about what is the implication of the experience of sisters. You're referring to these sisters who have migrant parents. Is that correct? So they have experience of not having their parents around. I'm not an expert on childhood studies, but I think the age matters. At what age did they start not having their parents around? Because the younger the child, then the more devastating the impact is. That's why in that quote by Christian Goodorf, I said sometimes they won't recognize the mother or the parent anymore. That if they left as a baby, when the child was a baby, or even 1 year old, 2 year old, 3 years old, and then for some, they can only come once a year or once every 2 years for a week or so, or a few days. And if you are an authorized migrant, they never get to see their children because they're afraid of going home because it will be harder for them to go back. So that definitely has implications, because you lose a certain part of the human experience, so to speak. There are the grandparents, there are the aunts, the uncles, but it's never the same. Also, you lose it. So you are right in saying that it has implication on the formation of the sisters. How do you fill that gap? Perhaps you are in the best position to fill that because you are very much in the know what's involved in the sisters formation. But one thing I really would like to read, I think, is the character formation program. Because like the good example that I've seen with ECMI, the Episcopal Commission for Migrants and Itinerant People, in collaboration with the Scalabrini Migration Center, is they have a book for it, actually, the Values Formation Program. And I think that is one area that maybe there can be purposeful, meaningful formation, perhaps even exposures, conversations with migrant families who or even migrant children. Yeah, so that will make a difference. Yeah.
So please raise your hands. Wow. There are a lot. Okay, let's have, yes, let's have a sister from the Philippines. Then, okay. We can have 3 and Kenya. Okay, please.
So thank you, Professor, for your beautiful presentation of the challenges. I really appreciate that you...
I know you presented earlier.
I am Father Vincent.
Okay.
From India, from Tamil Nadu. Therefore, it was quite interesting, your presentation. Really, I appreciate that you said the extended family kinship. Really, that brings the people together to address the challenges. As you said, there is a development of media which influences the family. As you said, that it helps sometimes to for the relationship, especially as you cited the example of the parents working elsewhere, but they are relating through internet. That's good. Another time you said, sometimes it also brings infidelity among the relationship, among the couples. So as we are extended family, how can we address as a family to be united, family as a Christian extended family, how can we help such a problem of infidelity among the family?
So, Sister Jean, then thanks. Yes.
Good morning.
And then,
I am Sister Jean. Thank you, Professor Gemma, for your very good presentation, and I really appreciate it, especially for the theoretical and practical presentation. My questions, you have mentioned a particular situation of a sister who doesn't have this apostolate to help among the migrants and immigrants. And for me, because it's not also one of our apostolates, so as an educator, and I'm not a social worker for the literal sense. So in this perspective, what do you think are the possible way to help regardless of the specificity of apostolate? And how can you handle situations that they're very hard to get involved in the alliance between government and the church leaders? You mentioned some bishops that they don't mind because of the risk that they have to enter. So considering that Filipinos, you can see Filipinos all over the world, so I am also happy to help them. So in your particular way, so how can we get involved with this conflict? Thank you.
maybe we can go to, and then you finish, okay? See?
Thank you. Sister Kelly from Kenya, Sisters Omer of Kakamega. My question comes from our mission. Our congregation was founded by a Mill Hill missionary in 1932, and the main aim of the formation of for the foundation of our congregation was to take care of the most vulnerable, especially the girls. So according to the discussion, it has brought me back that the sufferings of the women has been there and is still there. So I'm wondering, you are talking about the immigration, then you said that you talked about so many sufferings concerning the women. Have you ever asked yourself, why is it that these sufferings are only facing, a lot of challenges are facing the women? And then, because we normally say that behind any successful man, there is a woman, why is it again a lot of challenges facing the women? That is my question. Thank you.
It's good. We have many questions and they are very short. That's good. So we may have more.
Good morning. I'm Brother Rogelio from Philippines. I'm studying about migration in Urbaniana University. Yeah. Migration is a phenomenon that continues today, and the main reason for migration is economic problem. However, my question is, with this migration, we cannot avoid the presence of second generation youth, that is, children of parents who have migrated to different countries. I would like to ask for your opinion on whether the faith and culture of migrants' country of origin can still be transmitted to their children who are born outside their homeland. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. The first one by Vincent about infidelity. How could we be of help to avoid that? First, I think, is to address the root causes of the infidelity. One would be really the loneliness and isolation, the sense of isolation, homesickness. So making possible frequent contacts between, in this case, between the spouses is really important. As Goodorf suggested, the technology can really help, because it's really impossible for them to be physically together and be beside each other anyway. So the next best thing is technology. So if you are a parish priest in the rectory or the parish, perhaps you can provide, she said, a phone or a computer for them to be able to communicate with each other. So address that. The second, I think, is if I got your dissertation correctly, it's about marriage formation something. I think about to drive home the importance of marriage in the, what do you call it, the pre-Cana, those seminars, in our homilies, because even before people get married, if they have an appreciation and understanding of the importance of marriage, and they have very real understanding of the challenges and how they might be able to address those challenges, there is hope for that relationship. My sister just celebrated 25 years of being married to her husband, and I was asked to give a kind of a short message, and I was telling them that, having such celebration is also a milestone. It's important because it's a testament to our nephews and nieces, their children, to our family, to their friends, that marriage and keeping married, being married works. And it can work if the two people are willing to make it work. So the theology of marriage comes into play here. It's not just about being faithful, but how does that husband, how does the wife look at marriage in the first place? Because if you believe in the relationship, if you really love the other, your wife or your husband, temptations will be always there. They're all around us, but it's the strength that you have, that as a person, as an individual, as the husband and as the wife. So I think also between the spouses, developing rituals, like I'm going to be a bit personal here, but for me and my husband, whenever one of us is away, we always call each other every day. So it's our agreement. Because for me, I also tell her, you know, especially if you're in a country where no one knows you, something happens to you, no one will care, no one will know. But if you didn't call me, then I know I must be concerned. So I think those type of things, you develop rituals, you have to come to some kind of agreement, like that father that I mentioned. They call their children every day, every other day, and other means, but every day online. So I think if you have these rituals, you keep the marriage alive, you keep it, you know, and if you have problems, then those rituals, those talking together, then you talk it out. You know, you discuss it, you try to resolve it, rather than, okay, it's something's wrong and it's breaking apart, okay, goodbye to you. But if you keep talking, if you keep honoring that marriage, you know, when you said I do, I think, you know, that is part of our ministry, I think, to drive home when this couple face you at the altar, to really drive home the importance of marriage. Why are they marrying that person in the first place? There must be something in that person that they cherish. So are they going to give up on that? So it's a duality of what help them create rituals, means, and ways in which they can keep the marriage alive and beating, and also on the practical side, maybe the children. So I mean, the education of the family really comes into play. You know, it's not also about saving the marriage just for the sake of the children, but the children have also play a role in it. You know? So that's I hope that addresses your question, Vincent. The second one by Jean about the apostolate. How do we make it possible? I think that her congregation is a good example, because the charism of the congregation, the ministry of the congregation, is for the vulnerable. So it's a matter of reframing, putting the face of the migrant as the vulnerable person. So you can also approach it that way. You know, especially a lot of the congregations have very broad mission iterations, or mission, the vision for mission. Or you can also really evolve, like the Scalabrinians. The Scalabrinians as a congregation was founded to minister to Italian migrants, to accompany Italian migrants. But today, much broader than that, all migrants. So it can also be a way of challenging your congregation. How does it engage the times? And also, you can also present, because when you are a missionary overseas, you are a migrant yourself. So you can also make a case that, you know, that means it's inevitable that the people you encounter are also migrants. So how can you say no? I mean, if the person indeed is already right in front of you, it is not Christian to ignore it, to turn a blind eye on it, to run away from it, to ignore it. So it's an antithesis to our Christian duty and responsibility to care for the other. The third one, why is it only the women? Not necessarily. It depends on the cases. It depends on the context. It depends on the destination country, the sending country. Like certainly in countries which have, in the Middle East, it can be quite challenging. It can be quite challenging if you are a female migrant, and it also depends on your occupation. Your status as a migrant, your identity as a migrant, your occupation as a migrant. If you are working in the low to skilled medium jobs, then the challenges are really immense, and on all fronts, on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, on the basis of class, and on the basis of occupation. So there are many other factors. We cannot simply say that all women face most of the challenges or all the challenges all the time. There are certain factors that complicate it, that compound it, that multiply it. Yeah. So depending on the country where, if you say we work in Saudi Arabia, for instance, that's why certain that pre-departure orientation seminar that I went to, that was being given to female domestic workers bound for Saudi Arabia. There's also a section there on sexual violence or violence against women, some kind of an information session, so they are aware of certain situations in which they might face those kinds of things. So it depends on the context. But you are true that they are more vulnerable. Okay. All right.
Your question was?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
There's one more.
Yes.
Brother Rogelio, second generation. Okay. How do you address cultural transmission? Actually, for the second generation migrants or immigrants, the Catholic Church plays a very, very important role everywhere you go, especially in Western countries. There are many works by not just theologians, but also in the social sciences, anthropologists, sociologists, sociology of religion in particular, where the cultural and ethnic reproduction and maintenance occurs with the Catholic Church playing a large role in it. Why? Because the family goes to church, and the family is where a lot of the cultural customs and traditions are being celebrated. You know that as a Filipino, like for me, when I was in Melbourne, I went the feast of the first Filipino, San Lorenzo Ruiz. Okay? And it's an occasion for everyone. You even have the all the everything Filipino. So it is not a very serious problem, I think. I mean, it is an issue, but in terms of the availability of resources and services and ministries, if you look, you will find something. You just have to find the suburbs and the towns where there is a high concentration of the ethnic group. And then there's a church there, and then that church will be a locus for the celebration of local customs and traditions. I remember when I was writing a chapter on transnationalism among Catholics, in Canada, the Ukrainians, there's even the Ukrainian National House is actually on church grounds, because it's an opportunity for them to celebrate the tradition. So the church plays a very important role there. The other thing is the migrants themselves do it at home. When I was doing the research for this paper, I was reading this book that came from the Conference of Asian Catholic Women Theologians. In 2020, the theme for their biannual conference was on displacement and disqualification. And one of the papers was this from a Chinese from Macau, whose dissertation at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, rather, was on the religiosity of Filipinos in Macau. And she writes about this mother who, because she was studying altars, the altars that Filipinos make, the portable altars, because, because of the economic challenges, sometimes they move from one house to another and in cramped houses too, but their altar moves with them. So when this particular woman got married, she's a teacher. So she has a status there. She's already a citizen, a permanent resident, and she has got children. So what she did was she always builds an altar, because for her, the altar is also typical of Filipino customs and tradition, where you gather and bring the family together. So I think that's a complement. It happens in the family itself, but it also happens in church. Most of the times we learn about those that happen in church, but there are many things that we don't know that it happens in the family. The praying of the rosary, for example, it's if the family has that tradition, they already pass it on right at home. But the one issue that we have to concern ourselves here with, I think, is it's the college-age children. That is usually the main concern, because a lot of the ministries among immigrants is, as I said, concentrated on children, preparation for communion and confirmation, or folk religiosity, the popular piety. Then the children, those college age, are normally lost. There's no ministry for them. When I was teaching in Chicago, then teaching a class on church, and then my students, they're college age students. We had a discussion on, going to church and liturgy, because we were talking about liturgy. And this young Polish American who said she doesn't go to church, or she's not interested in going to church because it's in Polish. So she's very much acculturated, speaks English, born there, raised there. So they're looking for her. She wants to go to a church that's in English. So we have all those very intricate challenges that we have to deal with. And then in one of the texts I came across with after Christus Vivit came out, they came out with a national formation for young adults. And one of the lament of the participant in that formation, because I used to be a consultant for the subcommittee for Asian and Pacific Islander Americans with the USCCB. And in that capacity, so we brought some programs, my husband and I, who's also a theologian, with Asian American communities in the United States when we were living in the United States. And their lament in that formation seminaries, sometimes because we are young, we're seen to be like, we don't matter in terms of authority. They don't listen. I mean, we want to be heard, inputs in terms of, they always make the decisions for us. So in terms of the songs to play, the instruments to use, some things in the liturgy, maybe you can also integrate, listen to our suggestions. So those are important. First, I think not to focus only on children, but also young adults, and also the church and family component. And because society, we can't rely much. So really, in terms of cultural transmission, the family, the extended family, and then the Filipino family, because it becomes a community. So they also matter. That's why connecting with other members of the ethnic group is also very vital in cultural transmission.
Okay, you will be disappointed, but we don't. So now you see 1, 2, who now? So we have to stop to have lunch, to have a rest with the professors. But you see, only students could raise a question. So let me say just, and then Professor Shadji and Professor Gemma, you're a writer. We knew that, but we discovered you as a tutor because you can talk with students and have very concrete examples that have touched them. And for us being here, looking at your faces, your eyes, how much you have been touched is very, very important. So for this, thank you very much. You're a professor, but you showed you're also a wife, and you have rituals with your husband that entertain love. And thank you for that also. And we need this type of witnesses. And then you study migrations, but you're a migrant. Yes. In Australia, you've been a migrant with your husband in the US. And this also opens many perspectives because in some ways, we all of us, we've been migrants, and especially students from different countries. So for all this, thank you very much.
So once again, to thank Professor Gemma Tulud Cruz for this excellent presentation and also the discussion. It was really enlightening. And surely we are fortunate to have an international expert in the field, who is, as Professor Bolden already told, who also has exposure to different contexts, different countries, and she knows the reality from the sharing of experience or witnessing that she was sharing. It is clear that she is also in contact with the real situation and experience of the people. So in that way, it was really enriching. And in the beginning, I did not say that, but we have been collaborating also for our journal. She has been a member of the editorial board, like Philip Bourdain of Asian Horizons, and her husband is a famous theologian, Edmund Kia, especially working in the field of theology of religions or interreligious dialogue. and he also has contributed a lot for our publications, and so both of them have been collaborating with us for a long time. And here, surely from the participation, from the responses, from the questions raised, we know that it was really helpful for us, and it was really thought-provoking. So thank you very much once again. I would also like to thank our President, Professor Philip Bourdain, for this initiative, and also Professor Pier David Gwensi and Vincenzo for the work together, and all the professors and guests, and all of you for the active participation. Thank you very much. So buon appetito and buon pomeriggio.
Buon pomeriggio, buon pranzo, buon pomeriggio.